Let's watch a CNN panel discussing trans issues where it divulges into madness the way you might expect with a right-winger discussing any kind of LGBTQ issues. So I've lined a couple of these up and we'll jump in where it's needed with the additional context and fact checks.
The anti-trans ads, which I found absolutely deplorable. I worked as an LGBTQ activist for 10 years. I think it's outrageous and I'm terrified for my trans friends and family members. Those ads were for the base, right? That was to motivate the base to get out there, and that base, that MAGA base, and the sort of I would call Christian nationalist base, they did show up. But I don't think that is what motivated the swing voters to vote for Trump. I do think there's a mismatch between,
So they cut him off when he was in the middle of making another good point, but there was a few things I wanted to address before we moved on. These sort of culture war issues, transing the kids or trans women in bathrooms and sports, etc. It might stir up the biggest part of the Trump base, the cult, but these people are voting for Trump no matter what. They didn't really need this as the final push for them. This type of nonsense definitely isn't what swings those that you need, like those in the middle. It just leads to further discrimination and harm against said minority group, this time, of course, being trans people who are rightfully terrified, as Trump is on record saying he would ban gender-affirming care for all ages. And as to what this guy was saying before he was cut off, it is a mismatch in that Republicans have this built-in advantage of being able to make up these kinds of ridiculous stories, transing the kids, migrants eating the pets, and paint them as real issues and kind of chart the discourse towards talking about that rather than policy, while Democrats have the burden of being detailed and precise, having to be honest and factual.
I think there are a lot of families out there who don't believe boys should play girls' sports.
They're not boys. I'm not going to listen to transphobia at this table. I am not going to listen to you call a trans girl a boy.
Are you going to allow me to finish my explanation?
When you use a word that's a slur, I'm going to interrupt. That's not how it is. They're not boys. They're not boys. They're not playing girls' softball. I'm not going to sit there and listen
for a second because
hey, I don't know who this guy is, but more power to him. I'm just glad that finally someone has rejected the entirely stupid framing that people try to put this in, constantly conflating sex and gender for some sort of like intuition pump that this is wrong. They're not boys. Not all males are boys. This is also kind of just like a fake outrage thing, as I always like to point out. 0.5% of the population is trans. A small percent of that would be trans females, and a small percent of that would be trans female athletes. The fact that Republicans, conservatives are so willing to demonize this entire marginalized group of people kind of just gives the game away. They're transphobic, right? They're outright bigoted fascists, and in the cycle of oppression, you move from one group to the next, so you never really go away. You're just always testing the boundaries where they allow you to do so. They're hyper-fixating on something that affects maybe 12 people and using it to try and drive national hysteria against a marginalized group of people. It's rather disgusting.
There's no consensus that these are actually boys. This whole thing about trans girls is a canard. We're talking about a tiny, tiny sliver of the population.
That may be the
and
case,
we're using
but my point in terms of its effectiveness.
Thousands of people.
Hold on, just get to your point.
My point in terms of its effectiveness. Regular people with children look at these things and they say, you know what, this is a bit too far. I do not agree with this. I don't like this. I think Democrats are going way too much to the left on social issues. They're uncomfortable with it. A lot of people believe that. A lot of families believe that.
Notice the framing he again has to try and take here in hopes to give him some sort of moral high ground. It's the regular people, meaning that trans people are not regular. People who support trans people are not regular, because regular people, of course, think that they're weird. It's kind of odd seeing as trans people are more common than people with red hair. But if someone wanted to discriminate against gingers because, they're not regular, nobody would let that fly, rightfully so. It's almost like bigots are just oppressing whatever group that they know they can get away with, and currently it's trans people. It was gay people like 10 years ago. It was blacks before that. It's women pretty frequently, right? It's this guy is just right again, and there is no consensus on sex and gender being the same, trying to point up point to that is just another one of these kind of made up positions. Gender is neurosocial. These are socially constructed labels that have no inherent requirements, especially not biological ones. When Schurmichael says regular people, he just means conservatives, right? But why would we listen to conservatives? Conservatives still thought that black people weren't regular in the 70s and 80s. Conservatives thought that gay people weren't regular until 10 years ago. It's a trend for conservatives to want to repeal the 19th Amendment, forcing women to not be able to vote, or how they're now chanting your body, my choice. They're the last people that anyone should look to for a standard of acceptance.